like you have seen already, that we can combine it multiple things.
All right. So if anybody else have any questions, just put it in the chat or don't be hesitant to speak up.
If you get it, allow screen sharing.
For you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me make you a co-host. You have the slides?
Yes, I do.
All right.
Awesome. I can now share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yep. Just yeah. There you go.
Loading. Okay, so like we said, we're going to be today getting more to technical things. What we have talked about for most of the class has been more about framing, about being creative, and how to get the shot that you want. We're now going to be beginning to talk more about camera settings and how to properly expose your pictures. So we're going to get a little more technical now. All that we have talked about pretty much all come from your mind. They can be, you can be creative in your own way. Everyone can be creative in their own way. But now we're gonna be more focused in the camera and how you can use and manage your camera better. There are a couple things. There are a couple things that we're gonna go over. One is focus. In each photo, you can have different things stand out. As you can see in this picture, we have the bird that is very sharp. We can obviously tell that the picture that we want to take is of the bird. Everything else, the grass doesn't matter. What we care about is the bird, and that's why we have the picture focus on the bird. In different cameras, in the phone, you have different ways to focus. In most phone, in most modern newer cameras, you can just simply tap where you want to focus and it will quickly just focus there. Yeah, anything you want to add, Steve?
Yeah, like I said, the second photo that you see next to the bird, the one thing I always say, like, if you can explain to me why you did it, then it's correct. But if you can't, then it's incorrect, right? So if the second for the second photo, if you said, here's a picture of this cool bird I found, here it is, right? Well, that bird isn't in the focus, right? So we can't. I can say I see some like dead plants in the background, right? So you have to describe what you want your focus to be on. And clearly, since we see a bird in the foreground and the background is not very interesting, then we just know that you missed the focus, right? So as hopefully by the time we get to the end of this class, and which we'll talk about in a second, like starting off, I'm pretty sure most of you are using your cameras on automatic, and most people do that. If you have a DSLR, there's different modes you can use, which we can talk about, but it seems like most of you are using your phones. But most of your phones, I don't have an iPhone, so you'll have to ask Miguel for like iPhone questions. But I know even for my Android phone, I can leave it in auto or manual. And when you get to know your camera more and more, it's better to know what you want to manipulate and how you want your photos to look. So it's better to use manual. So we'll learn how to use those steps more, and hopefully by the end, maybe you'll be using manual more than with your photos. Like Miguel said, I thought I just watched a video the other day, and they did like a camera test of like all the different phones, and they said most people don't even tap the focus on their phones, which like blew me away. That like all you have to do is tap tap what you want, and they'll focus for you, and you take the picture. So if you haven't been tapping to focus, start to tap to focus, and your camera then won't decide what to be in focus.
Yes, like I said earlier, we're now learning how to manipulate and use your camera, how to manage your camera better. And by just simply tapping or selecting where you want to focus, you're telling the camera, hey, this is what I'm taking a picture of. Because cameras, just like many computers, when you put it on auto, they don't necessarily make the right choice every time. They might make it the right choice most of the time, but they won't every time, like you see in the picture on the right. obviously we don't necessarily care much about the grass. The grass is not as interesting as the bird, and it might be totally incorrect. And your camera might do these kind of things. As you might have already seen, that you might want to take a picture of a flower and it completely missed the focus, and your flower is blurry, or the person you want to take a picture of is completely blurry, while the car behind the person is completely sharp. So you will see that more often as we go. All right, now focus is one thing. Focus is the way you make your picture be more sharp in a certain way, in a specific object be more sharp in your picture. Now we're going to talk about lighting. Lighting is just as important as focus, as framing, as perspective. You want to make sure that you light your camera, your picture well. Here I have 3 examples of different kind of pictures. The far left picture, we have what we call overexposed picture. As you can see, the dog is very bright. Although most of the things on the background and most things are in good lighting, the dog is very bright. And if we move to the center, the one in the middle, then it's too dark. We can see the background. We can mostly see the dog, but it's mostly dark. But now when we mix in the middle, the far right, the picture on the right, we can see the picture is well lit. We can see that everything on the background mostly, and the dog is well lit. So that's when you hear us refer to overexposed, underexposed, or properly exposed, this is what we're talking about. Overexposed means it's very bright. Underexposed means very dark. If properly exposed, it means that you did everything right. The picture looked very well. Now, everything with intention is correct. So if you're going for a kind of dark picture, it's okay to go a little dark. If you want to go for a very bright picture, it's okay to have it bright, but you have to do it with intention. Just like focus, if you want to focus something in the far back, it's okay, but you have to do it with intention. Now, to accomplish this lighting, you have to learn 3 things. And trust me, if you don't get it right in the first time, don't worry. It's going to take a little time for you to understand these kind of things. These 3 things: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. But you should begin to become familiar with these terms: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So aperture, the aperture we explained last time. The most Steve, can you explain this a little bit?
Sure. So the aperture, like the first step of you like controlling the light with your photo, I would start off with your aperture. Now, if you're using your phone, sometimes they may use iris or things like that, or whatever you can see that controls like the brightness or darkness of your phone. Most of these terms are used for like actual photography cameras, and you'll have the actual aperture that is built in your camera, and you can sort of see it. But sometimes it may be digital or things within your phone, but you'll still see like numbers like this within it. And just to know with aperture, the lower the number, and we usually call aperture also f-stop, because the number is represented with the f-stop number. So as you can see, the lower the f-stop number, the wider open your lens is or your aperture, and that lets more light in to your photo or to your lens or your camera. So lower numbers allow more light in, and you can see higher numbers let less light in. So if you're outside and it's in daytime, you're not going to want to use a 2.8 aperture because it's going to be overexposed as we saw. So you may have to use like a f-stop of an 8 or 11 to balance your light out, and you would always use aperture first. Now, if you need to further adjustments, we can show that. But also, if you have a DSLR like Andre has, And we took out some stuff in here because it's, you know, most of you don't have DSLRs. But as Mia was talking about before, or like when you have your iPhones or Androids, you have portrait mode and your background is blurred out. Uh, Lower f-stop numbers will sort of blur out your background, but it also depends on what type of lens you have. So some, you know, like prime lenses, which means that you can't zoom on them, like 50 millimeters and 35 millimeters, uh, will get you more of that because they're faster lenses. And I'm probably spitting out a lot of stuff that you may not understand because I'm giving you more DSLR type type things, but
I don't
a
even
fast
get
lens just
what
means
stands for.
faster lens just means you can have a lower. Thank you. Sorry about that.
A lower at you. Okay.
Yeah. You can have a lower f-stop. So some if some lenses allow you to go down like 1.2, which just means it lets in a lot of light. But if you remember what we said last week, the lower the number, while it blurs out the background, the smaller your focus window, to sort of say. So like if I move up, my nose may just be in focus. If I move back, maybe my eye is in focus. So it's better to stay probably, and Miguel can probably answer this more, between like the 4s and 2s, so you'll get a little bit more in focus, and it'll be your photos will be sharper. So it's softer as also that you go lower, but I probably gave too much information.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's a lot of information. It's gonna be a lot. Don't worry if you don't get it in the first time. We're gonna be talking about these kind of things a lot more. And
just know, start with aperture. Aperture just controls how bright or dark your photos will be.
yeah, it's a first step into getting your picture. Remember, underexposed, overexposed, or properly exposed. We want to be proper exposed.
And sometimes on your phone, like I say, they make things a little easier. You may see a plus. It may start in 0 and it has +1. Well, that +1 will make it brighter. That -1 will make it darker.
Andre looks like he has a question.
Go ahead, Andre.
So there's this thing called the LV button on my Nikon. I don't know if that affects the thing. So like it kind of moves it.
It will tell you that's your light meter, Miguel, on a Nikon.
Live view.
Yeah, so it will tell you basically you want that line to be at the middle. If it's a 0, I don't know if it has numbers, but if that line is showing it in the middle, that means that you should be properly exposed, or at least what you're trying to take a photo of. When it moves more to the left, I believe that means you're underexposed.
It's like a square in the center of the screen.
Yeah, it just means that you switch from your eyepiece, which is a viewfinder. It's called viewfinder, to go to your screen, so your live view. So when you click, it sounds like you're taking a picture, but it really just moving the mirror up so the sensor can see the screen directly.
Oh, he just seeing the LCD with the picture of the LCD. Oh, okay.
Using the LCD. That's what LVs. It just stands for live view.
So like on the back of your camera, like on the settings, Andre, do you see something that has like an f-stop or like a number with a decimal point, like this?
When you look at the camera this way.
And if not, like I say, you can always write us a message. We're going to keep moving along, Andre, just because everyone doesn't have it. But any question you have, just put in the Google Classroom and we'll try to answer it for you.
Okay, so let me just go back and show you. So we gone over aperture. Now the next thing we want to go over is, part of.
You can go past that, man. We did that last week. There you go.
Shutter speed is the next thing. We got aperture. Now we talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed, again, affects 2 things. 1 is movement, and 2 is lighting. Again, affects lighting because you'll be telling the camera how long you're gonna let the shutter open. Now it might get a little technical because cameras are technical, but the camera has something called a shutter. A shutter is a door pretty much that open up to take the picture and closes. Now it happens really, really, really fast. If you ever notice how fast the camera sound when it's taking a picture. It's really, really fast. I mean, it's a fraction of a second, honestly. So when we talk about 1/500 of a second, we're talking about a second broken into 500 pieces and then taking just one pieces of that 500. So imagine, it's really, really fast.
Oh my gosh, that's so.
And so like if you remember what Andre said he played soccer this weekend, right? So say like it would have been cool. Of course, he just wanted to get out there and exercise and have fun. But if Andre wanted to take pictures of people playing soccer, then you want a high shutter speed because it basically captures motion and stills it it can stop motion without seeing like motion blur. So if you want to see someone kick a ball and you just want to freeze that time and space of them kicking the ball, then you need a high shutter speed. So for anything that's moving really fast, you want your shutter speed to be high. But like Miguel said, also when you increase the shutter speed, it also will make your image darker as well. But well, with photos, I was about to say, my mind always goes to video, like never use your shutter speed to darken your photo. But sometimes you can manipulate sort of shutter speed to balance your brightness in photography, but you don't really want to use it in that way.
So just like in aperture, you want to think of what your lighting scenario is. If you're in the bright sunlight, you might want to have a very fast shutter speed. That way you can compensate for the light. So if you are in, like I said, bright sunlight, you might want to have a 1/500 of a second, a really fast shutter speed. Now, if you're in like a more darker place where like Rocky was, you want to have a slower shutter speed. That way you can let in as much light as possible. So you might be in at 1/125 of a second. I don't know if you guys are like, if you understand fraction very well. Most people should understand fraction at this point. So you understand that 1/125th of a second is a little slower than 1/500 of a second. 1/500 is really fast. 1/125 of a second is a little slower. So
the other thing to say, like, because I know it happens with my phone, I don't have like the greatest phone camera. And you ever try to take a picture at night, and then when you take the picture and you look at it, it almost looks like a ghost, like you can see at the bottom. That's because most of the time when your camera's in automatic mode, when it's shooting at nighttime, the only way it can get more light in, like Miguel says, is to drop the shutter speed. So you'll see will look like ghosts and trails of ghosts because that's the way it can allow more light in, except for it's really hard. So like while Rocky could have did a lower shutter speed, they would have to not move their camera. So when you use low shutter speeds on things that won't move, it seems like if I press like the shutter button on my camera, take the picture, it may not seem like a lot of movement is happening, but all I have to do is move my camera a little bit, and that's when you'll get the ghosting effect. So that's when you need a tripod and probably even like a remote button to press it to go low. So the thing is, like, if you want to show like someone's really fast, or you want to show like motion blur as someone's kicking the ball, you want to show like power or like how fast they are, and you want to show that blurriness, then you would drop your shutter speed down. But I'll ask Miguel this, and then you can see from taking the picture, when you want something to be sort of like stop on a dime or less blur. Hold on, go back for a second, Miguel. You'll see that like 1/60th and 1/25 and 1/250. Like you don't really want to go below one like a 60th shutter speed. And even that has a little bit of motion blur, but you don't want to really drop down below that because even if someone turns their head or something, you'll see a little motion blur. So you want to, what shutter speed do you normally shoot at, Miguel?
Not below 160. 160 would be when it's really, really, really dark, like Rocky was to his picture. When it's really dark like that, you might go that low, but trust me, when you're holding your camera, even your movement would make a what we call motion blur. So just try not to go. You shouldn't go below that.
Let's go to ISO. We're going a little bit on time, and I want them to use the simulator.
So ISO is the last thing that we need to learn about exposing your camera. your pictures. And this is digital. This is something you do only affects light, so it wouldn't have a second effect other than noise in your picture. So if you notice, again, I'm going to use Rocky's picture today. It was a little hard to see what the picture was about, and that was not Rocky's fault, but rather the camera's fault. Cameras are very sensitive to dark places because they got to compensate for being dark, and we get something called grain. As you can see on the right side of the picture, it's really grainy and hard to see. And that's when because we increase the ISO. The ISO basically is, how he describes ISO, Steve.
Like you say, it's like an extra boost of light, right? So like when you set your aperture and shutter speed and you need additional light, then you can use like your ISO. It's like this how sensitive like your lens will be to light. Like you said, the higher you push it, while you maybe be able to quote unquote see what's in the dark, you're going to, like Miguel said, you're going to end up having a noisy, grainy photo like it is on the right, just because it's so dark and you try to push it up so high that it will happen. And you can see on the low end, for most cameras, like 100, there are some cameras that go below 100, but for the most part, like 100 is the lowest. Like, so when you're outdoors, you want to keep your ISO down. Like I said, a lot of times you can try to manipulate things, and if you can sometimes, play around with it. But if you want a nice clean image, you want to keep your ISO kind of low. Now, there are cameras that do shoot better in low light, like mirrorless cameras and things like that. Maybe, and I think it would be good to talk about, because for the fact most of you are in the photography class, maybe after this, maybe your parents will say, hey, you learn how to take photos. What camera do you want? And we can give you different ranges of cameras or what cameras do things a little better. Like my Sony camera, 3200, I probably won't get any grain out of maybe out of that thing, depending on the light. If I'm shooting in complete darkness, you're going to get grain. But if you're shooting like the city skylight of a city and there's lots of bright lights and things like that, some cameras 3200 might not be as high, but your phones and things like that, you're going to see some grain in that for sure.
And if you're shooting at midday, bright sunlight, there's no reason why you should go use ISO. You should keep it at 100, try to compensate with shutter speed and aperture. Now, let's recap a little bit about what we have talked about. I know it's a lot, but trust me, you're going to start to get it more as we go. There's three things that affects your picture, which is from your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And they go in that order. You first want to set your aperture, then you set your shutter speed, and last you set your ISO. You want to set your ISO depending on how you set your aperture and shutter speed, and last your ISO. It's going to take a little bit for you to get a hang of it, but trust me, these things are going to become more familiar as we go.
All right, so I know it's 3:30, but I'm going to just keep you here for like another 5 minutes or so, if that's fine. So if you have questions, you can ask them. Just don't hesitate. Put them in the chat, or just speak up. Just unmute yourself, which is fine. But right now, I'm going to put in the chat. I'm going to put a link there, and this link is to like camera simulator. So all the things that we were just talking about, you can see how they work. So if everybody can click on the link, and then I'll share my screen and show you what it will look like here. You should see this. And this is a little simulator, and it's good to see how these things work. So as you can see, you want to put it on manual at the top here. There are different things here which we didn't talk about. So, but we just want to make sure it's on manual. And they have this little set here for us. And you see the propellers moving. Some things are in the background, some things are in the foreground. So as we know, aperture 1 will control our lighting. And we can see this little exposure meter down here. Like I say, if you really wanted to hit like 0 to make sure we're properly exposed, anything on the negative side will be underexposed. Anything on the left, right-hand side would be overexposed, right? So one, if I want to make my photo darker, do I go to a higher number or a lower number for aperture? If I want to make my photo darker, higher or lower? Anyone?
I know it's a lot. And
So remember, the lower the number for aperture, the more light we let into our lens. The higher the number, the less light we have. Now, I wish this Canon simulator actually showed it in person, but you have to wait to take a picture. So let's see what will happen. So say if I put my aperture at 2.8, right? And say I leave my let's say I put my shutter speed to 1/180. You can see my ISO is at 1600. So I'm going to pick a name here. Let's see. So Kara, you're there, Kara?
Yeah.
All right. So with my settings here, so with my aperture at 2.8, my shutter at 1/180th, and my ISO at 1600, can you try to tell me what will happen to this picture? Will it be really bright? Will it be dark? What do you think will happen? No wrong guess.
or maybe you can take the picture, Steve, and she can
All
tell
right,
you
I'll take the picture here.
exposed, overexposed. Remember 3 things. We got overexposed, underexposed, and properly exposed.
Underexposed.
Who said underexposed?
Oh, I mean, very exposed. Sorry.
Yeah, so this is overexposed, right? So as you can see, the one thing you can tell with an overexposed picture is the same with underexposed, is that I forget the color of this wall, but if we go back, the color of that wall is blue, right? But when I click on my last picture, what color is this wall from this photo?
Sort of
Bright
white.
gray.
It's like white almost, right? So we lose details, right? This marble here, we can barely tell it's a marble. I don't know what this toy looking thing is in the back, right? We lose wow, I'm losing the word.
lose detail. We
lose detail, right? Everything is blown out. The same way, if it's dark, we can't see. You go into your room and it's dark. You may know where your bed is, but you can't see it, right? The same way if something's really bright, we don't look in the sun, one, because it's going to hurt your eyes. But if something's really bright, then we can't see either. So we need to properly expose things to have detail and show what it is. So if I want to make this photo darker, and like I said, you guys can play with this yourself, what do I need to do here? What's the first thing I should do to make this photo a little darker? Let's go with Sky. Sky, what do you think I should do to make my photo properly exposed? What can I change here?
Change the shutter speed,
What should I change the shutter speed to?
like a lower number. Wait, no,
So,
higher or
yeah,
lower.
go higher. So higher makes it darker. All right, so I'm going to go really high here. Let's take the picture and see what happens. So we are properly exposed. What else happens when we did shutter speed? What can you tell? If you can see, the propeller is moving here on this toy, right? So as you can see, the propeller here, it still has some motion blur, but because our shutter speed was so high, we know that it captured that like sideways. So remember, we said the higher you put your shutter speed, it slows down and takes that picture like within that motion, but it stops it still. And we don't see that blur. It's a little bit of blur, but we see that. Now the other thing, because we only changed the shutter speed, if you remember what we said with aperture, because our aperture is still low, it blurs out the background and foreground. It's just focused on the plane. What would I need to do if I want to get like the background? I want this toy in the back to be seen at the same time. Let's choose, let's go with Kirsten or Kirsten. I forget the pronunciation. Kirsten, are you there?
Yes.
All right. So what would I need to do in order to be able to show this little like Jack in the Box in the background? Like I said, we threw a lot at you, but
I know it is a lot.
all right. So I'll help you out a little bit. Remember, so the lower the aperture, then whatever we're focused on, then you won't see what's really in the background or the foreground. This picture has a lot. So the higher the aperture, the more things we can get in focus. So if I put my aperture at like f11, right? The one thing we see is that, well, you can't see it in this picture, but this will be in focus. The thing is, now we're at -3, which means my picture is going to be dark. So if I take this picture, we can see, yes, you can see that Jack in the Box now, but now my picture is dark. So to brighten that up, I'm going to change my shutter speed down. Remember, the higher the shutter speed, the darker it gets. So if I put my shutter speed at 125 and I take this picture, you see it's still dark. We still got some grain, but it's getting brighter. But you can see the slower we make our shutter speed, now the little propeller on the plane is like you can almost not see it because it's not going to stop that motion. But we're getting better to what we want. Now, maybe I don't need f11. Let's see, f8 is our exposure, saying it should be good exposure. I take the picture. Now everything's properly exposed. We can see the little Jack in the Box in the back. We can see the airplane, and we're starting to see what's in the front and foreground here. So you can see how, and this is called the exposure triangle, right? All three of these things can control exposure, but as Miguel said, the aperture and shutter speed controls other things as well. The ISO won't. So the same thing with the ISO. If I crank the ISO all the way up and I want to stop that propeller, I'll get an overexposed picture, right? So like I say, just play. You could play along with this. That's the cool thing. In your cameras, you'll have to put them on manual. Today we won't have like any photography thing. On Wednesday, when Lisa comes back, what we're going to do is give you another project, and we can go over this some more. We can, to help you out. But we're going to have a project using the alphabets. So we're going to put you all in small groups, and say if you get A, you can either find something that has like a shape of an A, or you can take something that represents A, like Andrew did. He can either take a picture of himself, because Andrew starts with an A, or he can take a picture of an apple. Whatever you want to sort of represent that the letters you get is what you want to take pictures of. So as I know me and